Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
When Trump was first elected, one of the themes we talked about was how Trump was going to create a lot of seemingly trivial controversies as smokescreens to distract us from what he really wanted to do. And many people advise that we keep from reacting to every situation because that would be playing right into Trump's hands. Another explanation for some of the outrageous things Trump has suggested has been that Trump is simply using a negotiating strategy from his book The Art of the Deal, where he shocks everyone with an extreme demand and then negotiates from there. Two examples of possible smokescreens or negotiating tactics that appeared after the inauguration were the changing of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America and the demand that Canada become the 51st state. But now that we're into Trump's second 100 days, both of these issues are still stories, and they're front and center in the news this week. Here's GOP Chairwoman Lisa McClain discussing the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico, and then Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney responding to Trump's talk about making Canada the 51st state.
House Republicans continue to work to codify President Trump and the American people's agenda. We will codify President Trump's executive order renaming the Gulf of America. The American people are footing the bill to protect and secure the Gulf of America. It's only right that it's named appropriately.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together.
While creating smokescreens or using negotiating tactics may play into some of what's going on, I think there's a deeper issue here that runs through virtually everything the Trump administration is doing these days. The deeper issue is that authoritarian men feel entitled to see and take whatever they want. There are reasons why an authoritarian man like Trump resonates with conservative evangelicals more so than any other group on earth. It has to do with their theology of authority. So I sat down to discuss the connections between authoritarian theology and authoritarian relationships with Christa Brown, author of Baptist Land, a memoir of abuse, betrayal, and transformation. Did I see that right today, that today is the 1-year anniversary of your book, Baptist Land?
Yes, it is. It's been exactly 1 year. And, what a year it's been. All sorts of good things have happened, and I've gotten to have conversations with all sorts of people that I wouldn't have otherwise. So that's been a good thing.
Yeah, I'd imagine. I know, for me growing up in the world of independent fundamental Baptists, there was a lot in your book that I resonated with, and a lot of scenes that felt very familiar to me. One thing I remember noticing even as a teenager was how our churches and schools always wanted to have absolute freedom from the government, but absolute control over us. And one of my favorite scholars, Chrissy Stroop, has made the comment that the United States feels like it's turning into a Christian school. And I thought that was really insightful to see what's going on today. It's like what they did within the walls to us. They're now wanting to expand beyond the walls of their church and school to the community through the government.
Right.
So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how powerful conservative men wanting absolute freedom for themselves and absolute control over everyone else is related to entitlement.
Well, having grown up in the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest evangelical faith group in the country, the largest Protestant faith group in the country, and a very, very authoritarian and very, very hyper-conservative faith group, I have seen that. This is the kind of thing that makes me quake, this drive, this constant drive for more power to impose this religious authoritarianism on others. I have seen that at the micro level, what that did in my own life, in my own family's life, uh, in my upbringing, and resonates and still impacts me today. And then to imagine that, the seeking of that across all of America, across all of our nation, is in my mind just horrifying because I do think it is a gross impediment to human flourishing. Um, and inflicts enormous harm on people, even people who are not specifically abused as I was within the faith. There's all sorts of other stuff going on, which are the theology itself, in my view, is an inherently abusive theology, and it trains children up in ways that impedes their very development into whole human beings. Um, I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
Yeah,
that's kind of where I go.
yeah, and I'd like to explore some of that theology with you too. So, um, in a recent piece, you wrote about the link between Christian nationalism and authoritarian parenting. Speaking of
Right.
children, there, and you talk about how these men feel entitled to coerce people into submission, and like they look down on kids, and then they essentially treat women as if they are also kids. And so I'd be interested in hearing how pervasive you think that treatment of women and children is in conservative evangelicalism, and then also to what degree you see those dynamics playing out in the Trump administration's treatment of women and children.
Well, I think those dynamics are very pervasive, so much so authoritarianism is the very air that evangelicals breathe. It's in the water. Um, it's what they're raised with from toddlerhood. If you're raised in this, so this stench of authoritarianism is so pervasive that they don't smell it anymore. It's like the rot is there, but they're just totally accommodated to it. Um, Someone once said to me, this was a guy who has counseled a lot of clergy sex abuse victims, and he said, what Southern Baptists do is they treat adult women as if they are at fault for their own victimization, and then they treat children as if they were adult women. So anyone who's not, at the top of this hierarchy is going to be imposed on and at risk of abuse. I don't think you can have a whole system set up on hierarchical arrangements without fostering abuse because you will always, no matter how much they say, well, everyone's equal in the eyes of God, you're still creating a system that is based on a separate but equal philosophy. And that kind of philosophy, that kind of social structure, that kind of foundation for relationships, I think will always lend itself to increased risk of abuse.
Yeah, it's like we recogniw how that separate but equal mindset negatively affected people across racial um, lines, but then when it comes to gender or age, somehow it's different.
Yes. And isn't that fascinating? I mean, going back to the Southern Baptist Convention, which that's what I tend to talk about, but I think it's important for people to realize that it carries an outside influence, an outsize influence bigger than its own numbers. It influences, evangelicals across the board, non-denominationals. It has a huge influence. The very religion itself, the faith, Southern Baptist Convention, was founded on the defense of slavery, was founded on the most horrific sort of hierarchical arrangement, and theologically justified as being what God wants. And what I find fascinating is, yeah, the Southern Baptist Convention back, I forget when, issued, a perfunctory apology, but they have never really, really reckoned with how did they get it so incredibly, horrifically wrong on race as to sacralize slavery, to consecrate the Confederacy, to launch a civil war, and bless it. Uh, how did they get it so wrong? They have not reckoned with that, and then they use that same intellectual, theological rationalization to justify everything about gender. The whole hierarchical divide of complementarianism and of men having authority over women and women being supposed to, God wants them to submit, and not only submit, but to graciously submit. No, this is inherently abusive in how it raises people to think about themselves, and not just girls and women, but I think it's really damaging for boys as well.
Yeah, I talked with Angela Denker earlier this year, and she has a really good book about that, American Boyhood.
Yeah, yeah,
So one thing that you quote in your piece is you quote a study by sociologist Sam Perry
right.
about how how Christian nationalism is a strong predictor that Americans prioritize obedience in children over children thinking for themselves, and they also endorse hard spanking to discipline children. So, and you kind of explore some of that as far as like children, evangelical children missing out on developing intellectual autonomy and learning to think for themselves. So I'm curious, like, why does white evangelical theology have so much fear that it controls people to the degree where they can't even think for themselves?
Well, you've talked about this some in your writings. I mean, it's founded on this notion of a violent God who seeks retribution. Um, and we must all bend the knee and bow down to this violent God. And I think that is an inherently sort of the violent underpinnings of that infiltrate more broadly into all of their views. And if you're raised, as I was, believing in a very literal hellfire of an afterlife where you would burn forever for all eternity and never get the luxury of burning up, but it would just keep on. Well, that's fearful, particularly for a child. It's just amazing to me that they teach this to children because the imagery of it is so incredibly awful. Um, and yet, this is what we inculcate in children. And yes, that's enormously fearful. I don't know how children can cope with that. In hindsight, I don't know how I did. I became submissive, is how I did. Because that was what was demanded of me. Um, and yeah, I thought that Sam Perry's research was really, really, really fascinating. And if you consider that some other research from the Public Religious Research Institute, which showed that almost two-thirds of white evangelicals are either adherents or sympathizers of Christian nationalism. This means that a whole lot of white evangelical kids are being raised in this environment, in this context that really stunts their own uh, intellectual autonomy, their own ability for independent moral reasoning.
Yeah. And also like not only from the child's perspective, but what parent can live with the idea of their 4-year-old burning for eternity?
Yes, and so they want to train them upright. Train them upright, train them to be obedient so that they will not burn for eternity, and so that the whole family will then be joined together for all eternity in the eternal afterlife.
Yeah.
Um,
Even though your aunts and uncles probably won't be there, and that's somehow fine.
yeah, right. But, you know, and I think parents wind up raising their children and doing things I think that are sometimes really incredibly hurtful. And they would say they did it, of course, with very good intentions. They want to raise their child upright, to be a godly child. That's a word I truly hate. I hate that word godly. I think it's been so exploitative. But I think there is that intention there. But I cast it on, the faith of how it has created this. this harm that really impedes people from being whole.
Hmm. They tell us this theological narrative that we were created perfect, but then we fell and now we're not perfect. And so justice is somebody's body having violence done to it, either Jesus' body on the cross or our bodies in hell. And then they think that because they offer a solution of Jesus' perfect obedience being accredited to our account by faith, or Jesus' penal substitutionary death being considered our punishment, that they're free. But at the same time, like I'll listen to a lot of conservative evangelical pastors, and they'll talk about how there's still so much fear about God the Father in their communities, and there's still a lot of control in their communities. And so, um, there are conservatives who agree with us on our critiques of the ethics,
Yes,
but
absolutely.
they think the solution is to become more immersed in the theology. And to me, the problem with their theology is not only at their solution phase of this perfect obedience of Jesus and this death of Jesus, but it's in their fundamental assumptions. Like, what kind of infinite God would demand absolute perfection in order to be in relationship with finite evolving beings?
Well, a God that I want no part of. Um, but I do think that, when you start from this presumption that you have the one true faith and that you need to help other people so they can be saved and find that same one true faith, well, that's a very presumptuous starting place. It is a place of entitlement. You have the truth, you have the right. Um, and no matter how much you may say you're trying to do good with it, that is inherently presumptuous. And in my mind, it kind of pollutes personal interactions because you've always got one side who is starting from a presumption of thinking that what they have is superior. Um, that's never an equal footing for human relationships.
And it also makes love subservient to entitlement because you're no longer wanting to seek someone's wholeness, but your love is defined as getting them to submit to what you believe theologically.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right. I think that's a good way of saying it. Love, it requires you submit, concedes to submission, or
Hmm.
however you just said
Yeah.
that. That was good. Yeah.
So one dynamic that has been interesting for me has been befriending certain conservatives who agree with our critiques of authoritarianism, of authoritarian men, but they might not agree with our critiques of conservative evangelical theology as being inherently authoritarian. And like I'll cooperate with them and work with them and be friends with them to whatever degree we're all comfortable with, because to me, like there are degrees of authoritarianism, there are stages of evolution, and there are people that they have access to that they can free that I don't have access to. And there's another piece that you wrote called Trumpism is What White Evangelicals Have Wrought.
Yes.
And you quote the conservative writer David French, who said that Trump's bond with evangelicals is a result of the broken culture that flawed theology helped create. So I'm curious, like, what you would have to say to our conservative friends who will work with us on calling out authoritarian entitled abuse in the church or in the government, but who want to continue holding on to the conservative evangelical theologies, um, like that involve the Bible as an inerrant authority, human relationships as hierarchies of authority and submission, and justice as violent punishment.
Well, I would say I'm grateful for what you're doing. At the same time, of course, I would strongly urge you to interrogate your own theology because I think that is what's at the root of so much of this. I think that is what brought us into this place where our country is dominated by Trumpism, because authoritarianism has become so incredibly normalized across broad swaths of the country. White evangelicals, I mean, we're talking 85% have not only voted for this, but have championed it and have stuck by it uh, in the face of massive horrors. And yeah, they need to interrogate how. How did this happen? Why? Why are white evangelicals here, the faith group that doesn't see the moral horror of what's happening in our country now? And it's because they never saw the moral horror in their own faith groups and still don't to a large degree.
Yeah, I feel like it when you reacted so strongly against the word godly a few minutes ago, like that to me really gets at a lot of this because what they think is godly is being like God. You know, you're image bearers. You reflect what God is like. And so if your God is this highest authority, power, who exercises dominion over everyone and demands their absolute submission to this inerrant, list of rules, and if they don't, they're going to be violently punished forever. It's like you're going to reflect that as an image bearer of that being in society.
I think that's exactly right. On earth as it is in heaven, that is exactly what they want. And their view of heaven is looking down on all these other people who are burning forever and being tortured, which is I don't know, they need to deal with that, you know?
Yeah. Well, on that positive note, it's a dark topic, but I think it's one that definitely needs to be explored. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts with us, and I hope everybody goes out and gets your book.
Oh, thanks so much, Rick. It was great visiting with you. I appreciate it.
When we finished our interview, we joked about how often people respond to our critiques of conservative evangelical theology and ethics by saying we're being negative. But when people are being hurt, it's not negative to ask why. When entitled men are controlling and coercing women and children in the church and in the community, it's actually a positive pursuit of wholeness to interrogate the justifications they use to sacralize their entitlement. And sometimes that's going to have theological consequences when we are free to recognize and name patterns that work in similar ways across decades and centuries. This is where Baptist News Global can play a pivotal role in healing those who are hurt by entitled men. It's a platform where we can explore the politics and the theology, not from a place of fear that fosters coercive entitlement, but from a place of mutuality and love that embraces the dignity and wholeness of everyone. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow B&G daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. B&G is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.